Donald Trump scoffed as he passed the ceremonial line. "These guys," he muttered, "never seen a battlefield in their life. The heat, the cameras, the whispering crowd, none of it showed on his face. Just another day standing guard. Just another politician walking by with more ego than respect." But this one said something that would echo across courtrooms, headlines, and quiet kitchens long after he strutted past. It started on a clear afternoon outside Buckingham Palace. The courtyard buzzed with visitors' families with sun hats, school kids snapping selfies, tourists craning for a glimpse of tradition. The red-coated guards stood still, rifles upright, like something carved from stone. And then came Donald Trump. He moved through the crowd with his usual storm of security, flashes from the press, and a red tie that refused to behave. He was in London for a diplomatic photo op, handshakes, headlines, the usual circus. One of his aides wiped sweat from his forehead and mumbled something about the heat. Trump, never one to pass on a chance to speak loud enough for microphones, gestured toward the guards. "These guys," he said with a half-laugh, "never seen a battlefield in their life. Just stand around like toys in fuzzy hats." The words sliced through the air like a cracked bell. A few chuckles bubbled from his entourage. Some tourists froze, unsure whether they'd heard right. But one man didn't react. Lance Corporal Thomas Wren, Coldstream Guards, age 46, stood motionless. Not a blink, not a twitch. He'd stood in that uniform for over 2 decades, through ceremonies, storms, and quiet battles the world would never know about. He didn't move, not even when his commanding officer whispered behind him, "Let it go, Wren. He's not worth it." He let it go, on the surface. But someone else had seen it. A teenage girl in the crowd, dark-haired, quiet. She hadn't been watching Trump. Her eyes had been locked on her father, that evening, in a modest Surrey cottage. Thomas sat across from her at the kitchen table. No viral clip, no news cycle explosion, just a moment hanging in the air. She broke the silence halfway through their meal. "You always told me silence is strength." He looked up. Still in his civilian clothes, posture stiff like he hadn't quite let the day go. "But if someone says that about your brothers," she added, "and you stay silent, what does that make you?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Just stared at the rising steam from his tea. The way soldiers stare at smoke after battle. The next morning, he found himself in his study, replaying the moment. Trump's voice, clear and casual. "Just toys." Wren reached for his mug and missed. The tremor ran through his fingers. Barely there, but it was enough. And then the memories came. Kandahar, 2009, a joint ceremony at a U.S. base. Intelligence broke minutes before the flags were raised. An attack was planned. In full ceremonial dress, Wren led 2 men through a drainage trench, flanked an insurgent before he reached the western gate. They neutralized him. No casualties, no headlines. The American convoy that was about to roll into a kill zone never even knew. He never accepted the medal the Americans offered. Said it wasn't necessary. But now, those same Americans were laughing. Their leader turning real danger into a joke. He opened a drawer and pulled out a card. "Elena Pike, solicitor. 3 rings." "Pike," she answered. "Thomas Wren, Coldstream, retired. I'd like to discuss a statement made by a foreign official on British soil. Defamation, damage to military reputation. I'll see you Monday." By the time Monday came, she had a slim binder waiting. She slid it across her desk. "I've reviewed the footage," she said, flipping to a highlighted section. That line, "never seen a battlefield in their life," isn't satire. It's a false statement presented as fact. And when it's directed at a decorated soldier, that's actionable. She turned another page. "Toys in uniforms becomes defamation when aimed at someone with a documented record in combat. You did receive a battlefield commendation from the U.S. Department of Defense." "I turned it down," he replied. "Even better," she said with a smirk. "It means you're not chasing glory." "That plays well." He looked down. "I'm not doing this to humiliate him. I know, but if you let it go, you give him permission." He nodded. "File it." 2 weeks later, paperwork landed on the bench of the UK High Court. Thomas Wren versus Donald J. Trump. £1 symbolic. The rest £99,999,999 punitive. Charges: defamation, Reputational damage. Undermining international military honor. No press conference. No TV interviews. Just a quiet line in triplicate. Trump's response. Predictable. A senior campaign advisor, speaking anonymously, told the press, "Let the British toy soldier play dress-up in court. We've got real problems." But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, is that Thomas Wren had built a life out of standing still while the world fell apart around him. And now he was moving. But behind polished doors and political smiles, the mood shifted. Trump had been briefed on Thomas Wren's actual military record: 23 years, multiple deployments, citations that never made headlines but saved lives in silence. Still, his reaction was as casual as flipping a channel. "Never heard of him," he reportedly said. "Doesn't matter. If this thing picks up steam, I'll show up and shut it down myself." When Elena Pike relayed the news to Wren that Trump might appear in person, he reacted the way he always had. Still, calm, unbothered. "He'll try to make it a performance," Pike warned. Wren didn't blink. "Let him. Just so long as the courtroom stays quiet." Outside, gray clouds loomed heavy over London. The royal courts of justice stood like stone sentries, as if they too were bracing for something more than a lawsuit. On the other side of the barriers, a few former Coldstream guards stood silently. No picket signs, no chants, just men in overcoats with straight backs, there to bear witness. Inside, the courtroom was already full. No cameras, no flashes, just legal pads, quiet scribbles, and a hush thick enough to make every cough sound like thunder. At precisely 9:58 a.m., Thomas Wren walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit, navy tie, and the small infantry pin glinting on his lapel. Elena Pike at his side, her leather portfolio clutched firmly in one hand, a few steps behind them. Wren's daughter entered quietly, hair tied back, hands folded. 2 minutes later, the side door opened, and Donald Trump stepped in. Same navy suit, same red tie, flanked by Secret Service and his lead counsel, Alan Wexler. He didn't look toward Wren's table, just headed straight to his seat like a man who had seen courtrooms before and expected them to bend. Lady Justice Aldridge entered and began without ceremony. "This hearing concerns a defamation claim filed by Corporal Thomas Wren against former U.S. President Donald John Trump. We will proceed under standard civil procedure." Wexler stood first, his voice balanced perfectly between courtroom charm and calculated detachment. "We do not deny the comments in question," he began smoothly. "Mr. Trump acknowledges them, but we submit that they fall well within the scope of protected political opinion, colorful, perhaps hyperbolic, but not defamatory under British law." He let the words settle. The remarks were general in nature, not targeted. They weren't aimed at Mr. Wren personally. Rather, they commented on ceremonial tradition, and therefore cannot constitute specific harm to reputation. Lady Aldridge made a note without looking up. "And yet, Mr. Wren's legal filing asserts that his individual record of battlefield service was diminished by your client's remarks. Are you suggesting that no member of the Coldstream Guards could be personally affected?" Wexler offered a half-smile, just shy of smug. "With respect, your ladyship, the Coldstream Guards are by nature a ceremonial regiment. Their public duties are symbolic, honorable, certainly, but not operational in the conventional sense." In the gallery, Wren's daughter tensed, her jaw clenched, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Elena Pike rose slowly from her seat, her voice clear and hurried. "Your ladyship, while the uniform may be ceremonial, the man inside it most certainly is not." Wexler scoffed lightly. "We look forward to hearing how standing still won a war." A few light chuckles floated from Trump's side of the room. Trump didn't laugh, he just stared forward, blankly, like a man watching yet another episode of a long-running series. Pike didn't flinch. She turned to the judge. "Let's do exactly that." Lady Aldridge gave a small nod. "Proceed, Miss Pike." Thomas Wren stood. No theatrics, no clearing of the throat. Just a quiet shift as a man rose, not to defend pride, but truth. "My name is Thomas Wren," he began. "I served 23 years in the British Army, 12 of them with the Coldstream Guards. I stood in silence at Buckingham Palace. I also stood in the rubble of embassies in Kabul, shoulder to shoulder with U.S. Marines." He turned to Wexler, eyes steady. So yes, sometimes standing still does save lives. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Even Trump's attention snapped back to the center. Lady Aldridge jotted something on her pad, but no one noticed. They were all watching a man turn stillness into something powerful. Pike stepped closer to the bench. Corporal Wren, can you confirm your full military service? 23 years in the British Army, 3 deployments to Iraq, to Afghanistan. Seconded to Joint Force Command in 2007 for Embassy Security and Intelligence Liaison, retired in 2015, graduated from the University of Law in 2019 with distinction. Currently employed as a civilian legal consultant and private security advisor. When you heard Mr. Trump's remarks, how did they land? Wren didn't rush. That's a dismissal of my record as a false portrayal of our ceremonial service. And yes, personally, because while that uniform may look like theater to some, I've worn it in ceremonies and under body armor, guiding injured American troops through hostile terrain. Trump leaned in toward Wexler, whispering something urgently. Wexler shook his head, whispering back. Pike gave a crisp nod. No further questions. Wexler approached cautiously, testing the waters. Mr. Wren, you admit the public perceives the Coldstream Guards as symbolic. They're seen that way, yes, but that's incomplete, isn't it? Correct. So your commendations, your battlefield work remain unverified here today. You've provided no specifics. Are we to trust your word alone? Wren turned to the judge. Your ladyship, I request judicial authorization to submit sealed operational records, specifically File 381BR from the Ministry of Defense Archives under Allied Security Prt. Call. Is this classified? The judge asked. Yes, ma'am, but provisional clearance has been granted for limited disclosure. A ripple moved through the room, not noise, just a shift in weight. The atmosphere changed. Pike rose. We request a recess for your ladyship to review the materials in chambers. The judge studied Wren, then glanced at Trump, who had gone noticeably still. Very well. 45 minutes. All counsel remain available. The gavel came down. Trump didn't stand right away. He stared across the room, not with arrogance but with a flicker of something new, concern. When court resumed nearly an hour later, the tone had changed. No whispers, no glances, just a slow, solemn quiet, like the first step into a cathedral. Lady Aldridge returned, a manila folder in her hands, sealed with red ministry tape and the royal insignia. This court has reviewed the submitted documents in private session, she began. Her voice now bore weight. The material has been authenticated through the Ministry of Defense and cross-referenced with Allied operational records. She opened the file gently, carefully, as if the pages themselves demanded reverence. What follows, she continued, is a summary redacted only to protect ongoing national security interests. These details directly pertain to Corporal Wren's military record and the factual accuracy of the remarks made by the defendant. A single pen clicked on wood, sharp as thunder in the stillness. Then came silence so deep, it almost had weight. Lady Aldridge leaned forward, her voice smooth but resolute, like a judge reading a secret that had waited too long to be spoken. In October 2007, Corporal Thomas Wren was deployed to Kabul. Trump shifted in his chair. It was barely a movement, but in the silence, it might as well have been a shout. As part of a Coldstream Guard detachment, she continued, the mission was labeled ceremonial, but behind the pageantry, they were assigned perimeter security and threat assessment. Intelligence warned of potential attacks on U.S. diplomatic personnel during a fragile transition period. Another page turned slow, deliberate, like it might catch fire. On the 14th of October, a coordinated assault hit the western edge of the U.S. Embassy compound. 2 Marines were critically wounded in the first few minutes. Afghan security failed to hold the perimeter. And then she paused. Everyone leaned in, holding breath they didn't know they'd taken. Corporal Wren, armed only with a ceremonial rifle and wearing full dress uniform, crossed open ground under enemy fire to reach the wall. Undid. The courtroom didn't move. Not a cough, not a whisper. He used whatever he could find on site: cloth, rope, broken gear to build an evacuation harness. One of the Marines he carried on his back. 200 meters. While bullets rained around him, Lady Orbridge lifted her eyes and looked at Wren. That action saved the lives of Staff Sergeant Michael Torres and Corporal David Kim. Their survival gave us intelligence that shaped counterinsurgency efforts and prevented further casualties. She turned another page. No one breathed. A formal commendation was submitted by the U.S. Department of Defense to the British government, but Corporal Wren declined the medal. She let the sentence sit there like a stone. Trump was no longer smirking. The man who had once painted Wren as a glorified prop now sat still, jaw stiff, staring downward. "Corporal Wren," she asked, voice crisp, "is this account accurate?" Wren's voice was calm. "Yes, your ladyship." "Did you ever speak of these events publicly?" "No, ma'am. Only to those who needed to know." Then Pike rose slow, careful, holding a single sheet of paper. "If it pleases the court," she said, "we've received a letter from the United States Department of Defense." Lady Orbridge took the document, read it silently, and nodded. "The letter is signed by Undersecretary Martin Glennon," she said, "and confirms Corporal Wren's actions are documented in Joint Special Operations Command records. Though he declined public recognition, his conduct was exemplary. His contribution to the safety of American personnel is officially acknowledged. We thank him for his service and regret the circumstances that required this acknowledgement to be made here." She folded the letter and placed it beside the classified file. "Mr. Wexler," she said to Trump's lawyer, "do you wish to respond?" Wexler's stack of notes looked untouched. He cleared his throat, eyes low. "No questions, your ladyship." Lady Orbridge nodded. "Very well. You may step down, Corporal Wren." As Wren returned to his seat, his daughter locked eyes with him. No tears, no nod, just that quiet, fierce kind of look shared between people who've lived through the fire and came out standing. Behind them, Trump sat frozen. The man he'd insulted as a mannequin had once carried wounded Americans through gunfire, then turned down a medal for it. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. When Lady Orbridge picked up the classified file and set it aside, the room knew what was coming. It wasn't just a ruling, it was history being written. "This court," she began, "has reviewed all testimony, documents, and military confirmations presented from both the United Kingdom and the United States." Her tone sharpened. "Freedom of expression is a fundamental right in a democracy," she said, "but that freedom does not shield those in positions of power from accountability when their words cause tangible harm to others' honor, reputation, and dignity." She looked toward Trump now. No drama in her face, just truth. Mr. Trump's statements, made during an official diplomatic event abroad, did not merely challenge a ceremonial tradition. They directly undermined the professional service of Corporal Thomas Wren, a man whose battlefield record is now undeniable. Trump's lips pressed tight, but he said nothing. By calling him and his fellow guards toys and mannequins, Mr. Trump did not engage in political discourse. He promoted lies, lies that struck at the heart of a soldier's sacrifice. Lady Orbridge's voice grew louder, not harsh, but unshakable. And these statements, delivered before international media, spread far and wide. The damage wasn't minor, and it wasn't contained. She reached for the gavel, but paused. "This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Corporal Thomas Wren." There was no gasp, no applause, just that soft ripple, like a tide finally turning, in recognition of the harm inflicted. She said, "This court awards £100 million. Of this, £1 serves as symbolic compensation. The remainder, £99,999,999, is punitive. Not to enrich the plaintiff, but to send a message that defaming documented valor is not a matter of opinion. It has consequences." She raised the gavel and held it steady. Words have power, and when spoken by leaders, they shape legacies for better or for worse. This court affirms that truth cannot be buried beneath performance. The gavel fell with a soft but final crack. This hearing is concluded. The room moved in slow motion, like someone had dragged a heavy hand across the reel of time. Papers shuffled softly. Chairs scraped with a kind of stunned reverence. No one rushed. No one spoke above a whisper. The verdict had landed, not loud, not flashy, but final, like a gavel that echoed without ever striking wood. Thomas Wren stood slowly. He smoothed out the front of his jacket with deliberate care. just as he'd done for 20 years while putting on his guard uniform, every crease speaking to discipline, to pride. He gave a small nod to Ullum and a pike, then another to the mod liaison who'd sat like a quiet shadow throughout the proceedings. He didn't smile, didn't raise a fist, didn't glance toward the gallery of people who had shown up just to witness this moment. He simply turned with the quiet posture of a man who had said what needed saying and was ready to go back to the kind of life that didn't need a spotlight to feel whole. His daughter stood. No cheers, no tears. She just walked beside him, as though they'd practiced it their whole lives. Step for step, they left the courtroom like people who knew that some victories don't come with confetti, just peace. Behind them, Donald Trump didn't move. His team had already begun packing up, the usual chaos of folders and whispered strategy, but he stayed in his seat, elbows on the table, staring at something far beyond the wood grain. The man who made his name on bluster, on boldness, on never letting anyone else have the last word sat there wordless, as if the courtroom had gently, steadily taken something from him across the course of those hours, something prideful, something unchecked, and maybe, for the first time in decades, he realized silence could be louder than any soundbite. Out in the hallway, the world spun on. Reporters thumbed messages furiously. Clerks whispered through hallways. Phones rang with urgency. The old building had seen scandals and secrets, but something about this felt different. No one quite knew what to make of it yet. A defamation case wasn't supposed to feel like this. And then, in a small moment, no camera caught Thomas Wren and his daughter walked through the stone archway, nearly to the exit, when a voice called out from behind them. Corporal. Not shouted, not commanding, just spoken by a man who was used to being heard, even when he whispered. Thomas paused, turned. There stood Donald Trump. No podium, no fanfare. Just a man in a suit that suddenly didn't make him look larger, only smaller. His security detail lingered behind him, far enough to let this moment breathe. I didn't know, Trump said. His voice was quieter now, free of bravado. About what you did over there. Thomas studied him, measured him not by his name, not by his legacy, but by the weight in his eyes now that perception had collided with reality. Most people don't, Thomas replied. And that was it. No sermon, no sting, just truth. Trump's jaw moved, as though he was chewing over words that didn't want to come. Then he finally said, those Marines you pulled out, SUES and Kim, Thomas finished for him. They got home. That's what mattered. They stood in silence, the hallway holding its breath. No handshake followed, no apology. But something cracked open between them, less like forgiveness, more like understanding. Trump gave the smallest nod, barely there, and then he turned and walked away. Thomas didn't watch him long. He and his daughter kept moving, past the cameras that hadn't stayed, past the reporters who hadn't noticed, into a London that hummed on as it always had, ancient, indifferent, quietly respectful in the way old cities are for men who never ask to be noticed. The sky was gray as they stepped into the street. The wind held a chill, but it wasn't biting, just honest. A black cab idled at the curb, the driver already out, holding the door like he knew what had just taken place without needing the details. One look at Thomas, and the man just nodded, no words necessary. Respect doesn't always need sound. Thomas slid into the back seat beside his daughter. As the taxi pulled into the street, past buildings older than the country Trump once led, he let himself breathe. Not in triumph, not in gloating, just in release. A burden carried for too long had finally been set down. It wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about putting a story into the world that deserved to be heard, one that had been crushed under years of silence and assumption, back in the city's heart. Advisors and strategists scrambled. Phones buzzed in hotel rooms. Legal teams scrambled through spreadsheets, calculating the weight of £100 million judgment. Somewhere, aides whispered into phone lines bound for Washington, asking how this had all happened. But in the back of that taxi, none of that mattered. Just a father and his daughter, rolling past stone and steel, sharing a silence that said more than applause ever could, because the most important victories don't come from a gavel or a headline. They come when truth, quiet, patient, and wavering, finally finds its place. And maybe that's enough. Now here's the question. What would you do if someone with millions of followers laughed off your life? Work, if they turned years of sacrifice into a punchline? Thomas Wren answered in the most powerful way possible, not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth. And sometimes, that's louder than any microphone ever will be. Let me hear your thoughts. Should Thomas have walked away? Or was he right to face the insult head-on, with facts instead of fury? And do you think service, even silent and seen service, deserves our full respect? Drop your answers in the comments. And if this story changed how you see those guards in red coats, if you'll never look at them the same way again, hit that like button. Then make sure you subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained, because we bring stories like this to light every single day, stories that show how dignity, honor, and service often live in the quietest corners. Smash that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who thinks uniforms are just for show. Let them see what standing still, standing proud, really means. There's another powerful story waiting for you right now. Just click the next video on your screen. And remember, some heroes don't march, shout, or demand anything. They just stand, and in doing so, they change everything.